Hi, third graders. Today we're going to read a book called If the Polar Bears Disappeared. And the other day we read If You Take Away the Otter, and that was a nonfiction book, but it didn't have photographs and a lot of nonfiction text features like we usually see. And that is the same with If Polar Bears Disappeared. This is a nonfiction book teaching us facts about polar bears and their environment. And even though it's an illustration, and as we take a picture walk, you'll see there's not a lot of nonfiction text features, it still is a nonfiction book. When you're done reading this book with me, you have an online assignment to do. You're going to go on Google Classroom and see that there are 4 comprehension questions and 6 vocabulary words that you need to define. So, like good readers do, we are going to read the questions before we read the book. So we know exactly what we're looking for. And when you are reading and answering questions, whether it be on a test or an assignment, it is so helpful to read the questions first. Okay, then when you're done, you're going to say, well, I remember the questions, I remember the answers, and you just need to put them in. So our questions are asking us, how does the book describe animals that call the Arctic ecosystem home? So think of the name that they give all these animals that live in the Arctic ecosystem. Number 2, before these special bears were polar bears, what were they? Number 3, how do polar bears use the sea ice? So we're going to read and see what they use the ice for, the sea ice. Lastly, why are polar bears finding themselves vulnerable even though they are apex predators? Vulnerable means that they are in a bad or kind of sticky situation, a situation where something bad could happen. They're vulnerable. All right, so those are our comprehension questions, and I'm going to show you our 4 vocabulary words so you can pay special attention to them when we get to them in the book. The first one is atmosphere. Number 2 is subnivean. Number 3 is tundra. Number 4 is ecosystem. Number 5 is apex predator, which we already heard in one of those comprehension questions. And number 6 is climate change. So these are the 6 words you're going to need to write definitions for when you're done reading with me. So when they come up, pay special attention using context clues to determine what they mean. Okay, and I will make sure to point them out when we get to them. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading If the Polar Bears Disappeared by Lily Williams. This is a non-fiction book because it is teaching us facts about the polar bears and their ecosystem. This is the Arctic. It's an ecosystem in the far northern region of the globe. Few animals call this land home. The ones that do live here are strong, tough, slow, and sometimes hard to see. Do you see the polar bear on this page? All right, we've heard our first vocab word, ecosystem. So ecosystem, they talked about the animals that live in that ecosystem, a couple of them at least. Polar bears are believed to have descended from the common brown bear about 400,000 years ago. As brown bears moved farther and farther north, they evolved to fit new environments. So that was one of our questions. What were, before these special bears or polar bears, what were they? Well, here's the polar bear. What were they originally? Over time, they became perfectly adapted to the Arctic tundra, using the sea ice in traveling, hunting, denning, and reproducing. Even their white fur is an adaptation to the snowy, treeless place. So we read what they use the sea ice for. And also, I saw a vocab word, tundra. It didn't tell us directly in the text what tundra means. It just says they adapted to the icy Arctic tundra. So we know it's an icy place. We know it's where the Arctic is a tundra. And then read down here, it says, even their white fur is an adaptation to this snowy, treeless landscape. So based on context clues, I know that the tundra is icy snowy, and treeless. That helps me define it. Although they're apex predators in the frozen north, polar bears are still vulnerable to threats like pollution and habitat loss. Another one of our comprehension questions. What are they vulnerable to? Pollution and habitat loss. But the biggest threat to polar bears and other animals in their ecosystem is the melting of sea ice because of climate change. All right, so I saw apex predator, and hopefully we know what a predator is. A predator is an animal that hunts and eats other animals. So what does apex mean? You'll have to make an inference on that one or continue to listen and see if we hear that again. Another vocab word we heard is climate change. It says that this melting sea ice because of climate change. Well, and think about what the climate is and what it means to change. And you'll have to make an inference and continue to listen for that one as well. If too much of the sea ice melted, female polar bears couldn't get enough food to build their layer of fat they need before giving birth to their cubs in their dens. Without enough food, polar bears would be weaker than they should be, and females would have fewer cubs. Some of the cubs wouldn't be healthy enough to survive. The lack of available food would also cause hungry polar bears to travel outside their natural habitat, forcing them to compete with other predators. And here they are looking in the garbage can. I have to move closer to humans. These difficulties would cause the polar bear population to decline, and before long it could dwindle to none. If too much of the sea ice melted, other Arctic species would be affected as well. If polar bears become extinct, the number of ringed seals, which is polar bears' main source of food, could initially rise. So I have a text connection because we read in If You Take Away the Otter, we read about when there weren't as many otters, then those sea urchins took over the land, right? Or I should say the ocean. So in this book, when the polar bears were taken away, the seals take over the ocean. So that's a text-to-text connection, and that's all about the ecosystem. However, because ringed seals also rely on sea ice to mate, fish, rest, and give birth, they would struggle to adapt to the changing environment too. If too much of the sea ice melted, ocean predators like orcas would be able to catch more seals, which would cause seal populations to decline even further. With too few seals as prey, orcas could move south, disrupting the balance in the predator-prey relationship in those waters. If the changes in the Arctic become irreversible, which means they cannot be reversed or switched back, even more species of plants and animals would be affected. If too much of the sea ice melted, the Arctic North would grow even warmer and the landscape could change permanently. Shrubs that were once hidden under snow would be exposed and grow larger, crowding out the tundra's usual mossy fungi and grasses. Many of these plant species that are not used to growing in this changing landscape could disappear, causing herbivores like caribou to struggle to find enough food. Without enough snow, subnivean mammals like lemmings who make their dens in the snow would lose their homes, exposing them to harsh weather and predators and decreasing their populations. So this is the first time I heard the word subnivean. Okay, subnivean, it says that without enough snow, subnivean mammals like lemmings who make their dens in the snow would lose their homes. So these are lemmings, these little bunnies, And we know that Subnivian, it says that they have a lot of snow. They make dens in snow. So you're going to need to make an inference on that based on what you know about snow and what we just read here using context clues. What does Subnivian mean? Okay. With many of the herbivores gone, non-apex predators such as the snowy owl and Arctic fox would be the next to lose their main source of food. So there's some squirrels, the Arctic hare, snowy owl. Higher temperatures would also alter the reproductive patterns of insects, which could in turn disrupt the migration and breeding patterns of northern birds who eat insects. So look at this, affects everyone. Effects like these would begin in the Arctic and spread like a web into different environments. Snow stays cold because of the white color reflects the heat of the sun, sending it back into space. Because bodies of water, like the ocean, are darker than snow and ice, they absorb the heat of the sun, which warms the water. Then, in a cycle, the warm water causes more sea ice to melt. So look, we know from science that the sun is the main source of energy for the whole entire world. The sun shines down, and on ice, it reflects back to outer space. But on the dark water, it gets absorbed and it warms the water, making more ice melt. This cycle could continue until all the ice has thawed. Then neighboring ecosystems could change and their animals could disappear. This chain event would roll onward, affecting all the different ecosystems from the redwood forests to the hot deserts to the frozen Arctic until we are no longer able to stop it. And there's the sad polar bears. Fortunately, we still have time to save polar bears and slow the loss of Arctic ice. Scientists and researchers are working hard to find solutions and educate the public about how ecosystems and organisms are connected to one another. So people are working hard to help us and help the polar bears. The best way for you to help is to learn everything you can about climate change and how it affects environments like the Arctic. Taking action will lessen its devastating effects. And maybe we will find that the answer to saving polar bears has been right in front of us all along. And she's writing a research project on polar bears. The end. We do have a glossary, and we have some more information about how you can help save the polar bears as well. But I'm sure you can talk to your parents about that too, about how to help save the polar bears environment, and not just the polar bears, but how to take care of our world the best we can, right? So we don't have bad things like the polar bears and the sea ice melting and losing the polar bears. All right, I want you guys to go ahead onto your Google Classroom assignment and answer your comprehension questions and see if you can answer or fill in all the definitions for these 6 vocab words. Okay, just best efforts is all we ask for.